Now, as regular listeners will know, I really like a debate where you change your mind. Yeah? And I have to say this next one about the student protest that greeted Jacob Rees-Mogg on Friday. Well, it's already seen me do a 180 and we haven't even started it yet. So if you've missed the story, we've got the anachronistic Tory booked to speak to Cardiff University's Conservative Association, a talk the former business secretary did deliver. I believe the theme was his values and ideology. But before he could leave the venue on campus, he was confronted by a small crowd of pro-Palestinian protesters angry at Rees-Mogg's perceived Zionist values. And the activists, they hurled abuse at Sir Jacob. They waved flags as he tried to make his getaway, while security staff could be seen trying to sort of ward people off, trying to rush him. They managed to get to Rees-Mogg into a car, only for one demonstrator to then lunge at the vehicle and sort of flinging themselves on the bonnet before being dragged off by security. The protest was organised by the Welsh Underground Network and Cardiff Communists, and the former tweeting afterwards, I'm quoting directly here, that Mogg left under a barrage of our anger at his Zionism, anger at his cruelty to the working class, anger at his very existence. Now, at this point, I reckon most of us have probably already formed a view. You're either thinking, Boo sucks, Rees-Mogg got what he deserved, he mocked the people of Grenfell, he tweets far-right nonsense, he deserves this, or you'll be thinking how utterly disgraceful this treatment these those lefties doled out to Rees-Mogg. What utter scumbags they are. Now, there's been a lot of focus on protests of late. The government's Policing Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act of 2022, Public Order Act 2023, introduced, in my opinion, draconian limits on protesters. And perhaps as a consequence, we've started seeing a change of tactics. Demonstrators started targeting politicians' homes. So there's the sight of students mobbing the car carrying a former government minister. You can understand how the great and the good were soon lining up to condemn the scenes on campus in Cardiff. So we've got Conservative Party chair Richard Holden. He wrote, "No elected politician should have to put up with this shrill, intimidatory idiocy." And he was supported by Labour, if you can believe it. Shadow Welsh Secretary Joe Stevens saying, "I disagree with him, Rees-Mogg, on almost everything, but we cannot accept a culture of intimidation in our politics. The right to lawful protest is sacrosanct, but harassment and intimidation is unacceptable." Now, I was thinking about arguing, this may come as a little surprise, but I was thinking about arguing this morning in favour of the protesters. And my first line of argument was that Rees-Mogg, he said inflammatory and insulting things. And as someone who has held high office, maybe he's crossed the line. And if you cross the line, can you expect members of the public that you've upset to just suck it up? I suggest the answer to that is no. And then my second argument was that despite all the headlines, the Telegraph's was Rees-Mogg chased off campus by hard left demonstrators. The Mail's was a moment pro-Gaza students harassed Jacob Rees-Mogg, hurling vicious foul-mouthed abuse as they surround his car while waving Palestinian flags after he gives speech at Cardiff University. So not very snappy, but you get the thrust. And despite all the fear the papers have tried to generate, it wasn't much of a demonstration, in my opinion. It was far smaller and, I would suggest, more peaceful than the one I went to back in 1986, I think it was, when I was at Exeter University, and when no one was talking about a culture of intimidation and fear in our politics, when we weren't cracking down on protest. Oh, but it's different now, Matthew. Is it, though? Are protests out of control? Is free speech being curtailed? Are politicians intimidated? 0345 6060 973, the number. And this is really where I bring you to the crunch, because I may not be a big fan of Jacob Rees-Mogg. This may come as a surprise to a few of you, but I do know him. I do know him to be a man who cherishes free speech, and he will happily debate with people who actually despise him. And I respect that aspect of his personality profoundly. I really do. And this is where we get to the twist in the whole debate, because despite the fact that we've got Tory and Labour grandees lining up to say this protest is too much, people are being intimidated, they don't feel they can speak freely, Rees-Mogg doesn't feel the protesters crossed the line at all. He called it a legitimate and peaceful, if noisy, protest. He went on to praise the university, he praised Cardiff's security team. He went on to say that they were exemplary in allowing a lawful protest while keeping everyone safe. Universities, he went on, ought to be bastions of free speech, and as both the protesters and I were able to give our views without fear or intimidation, the proper traditions of adversarial debate were upheld. Good man, Rees-Mogg, good man. So is this proof Is this proof that despite all those parliamentary crackdowns on protest, that we're all okay still here in Britain, that we're still free to demonstrate, free to speak? So he was suggesting that perhaps demonstrations function as a form of sort of public performance review, that politicians don't get a performance review like most employees. Once every 5 years they get one. Maybe hearing what the public have to say on the streets is one way for the public to deliver their feelings. But again, Rees-Mogg, tall and male. What if it was a shorter female or somebody who finds intimidated by crowds? Well, perhaps Fiona Lally, my next guest, can help. National Campaigns Coordinator for the Revolutionary Communist Party, whose members chased Rees-Mogg off campus on Friday. She joins me now. Morning, Fiona.
Good morning.
So it's a fascinatingly nuanced situation we end up with, because I was originally planning to come on and say, yay for the protesters. Jacob Rees-Mogg has said incendiary things. I think he's crossed the line. The protest reflects public feeling. But the fact that Rees-Mogg doesn't have a problem with the protest then gets me wondering about the nature of demonstrations and whether we could apply the same logic to all politicians, to say a diminutive female, whether she might feel intimidated by the kind of protests that you arranged.
Well, yes, if this hypothetical person, supports a genocide. I mean, I think that you've spoken about inflammatory language, incendiary things that Jacob Rees-Mogg and other politicians have said. And yeah, their language is bad, but it's not just about their language. It's about what they actually do. It's about what this Tory government is actually doing in materially supporting Israel in the massacre that is taking place in Palestine, right? There's been a lot of politicians coming out saying things have gone too far, but the only thing that has gone too far is the genocide that is taking place right now. And people are so angry when they see politicians come into the media or go into the press talking about intimidation and feeling scared of protesters, because there's such a wide gulf between their individual experience and the actual material violence and experience that Palestinians, and not just Palestinians, people are facing in this country as a result of their actions.
I thought what Roderick said, that he felt you're not going to persuade anybody's mind by shouting at them, and I've been reflecting on that since he said it, and I wonder whether it is possible that the tactics of shouting, demonstrating, might actually see like the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg actually further entrench their point of view. So rather than winning the argument, you actually increase the division.
I don't think we were going to convince Jacob Rees-Mogg at that protest. And we're not trying to convince Jacob Rees-Mogg. I think people are so angry, right? And they have a right to be angry. And they're trying to express that anger in any way, shape they can. And as you say, the state is doing a lot right now to clamp down on protests and clamp down on democratic rights to protest. If you support a genocide, people will protest you. That is going to take place. These people are war criminals.
Would you accept that you will fundamentally disagree with the Israeli position, with Jacob Rees-Mogg's position, but would you fundamentally support his right to air his opinions to those who wish to hear them on campus or anywhere else?
He can say what he likes. What I'm interested in is the organized response to that, right? Because it's not just protests, ultimately, I think, that need to take place, because people are so angry. And the message that I want to get across is, with that anger, we can be organized to do something about it. There's a lot of violence. I mean, you mentioned division earlier, and doesn't this promote division? There's a lot of division and violence and horrible things in the world. It's very clear to me who is responsible for that, which is first and foremost the Tories and the government and the system that they oversee. And what I'm interested in is organising people, organising students, and beyond that, not just students, but workers, against exactly what this government is doing.
What if, Fiona, let's say that a future government decides it's time to crack down. We're not having no more protests on campus. Campus protests are banned. Would you then see that as furthering your cause, that it would actually crystallise the repression that is going on in people's minds, and actually you would see a further crackdown on protesters perhaps a victory for your cause?
Sorry, a further cut down on
If there were
protest.
further crackdowns on demonstrations, on protest, because of, say, the actions of your group on Friday, would you see that as something that actually galvanised people to rebel against a government that was to do such a thing? Or would it actually break you?
It probably would make people more angry, yes, and it would be the result. I mean, I'm sure the Tories would love, and not just the Tories. I don't trust Starmer's Labour government to treat protesting as a perfect democratic right either. They are just as complicit in what's happening in Palestine as the Tories are, in my opinion. They'll use any excuse they can to clamp down on this growing movement because it can move beyond just protests. I mean, ultimately, these protests are an expression of this anger, but the anger is not just in campuses, it's in workplaces as well. There's workers in industry, civil servants who've also been looking at what they can do to stop being complicit. And they should do everything they can. They should strike. Workers in docks that ship weapons to Israel.
Point made. And very clearly, I have to say, back in the day when Thatcher was around, I was open to the idea that perhaps she was a revolutionary communist and was her crackdown on workers was actually done to galvanise the working class in revolution. But unfortunately, I think I might have got that wrong. Fiona Lully, pleasure talking to you this Sunday morning.